Chapter 1. I've read somewhere that the first snow is kind of like your first love. It's here today and gone tomorrow. Yet there's a nostalgia to it that cannot be shaken. And what is snow, really? A bunch of snowflakes. 6 types of snowflakes exist, as discovered under an electron microscope. Plates, stellar crystals, columns, dendrites, needles, spatial dendrites, and capped columns. What made 2 hexagonal snowflakes alike? No one knew. No one could also explain what force drew the 6 molecules, millions of inches apart in the sky, to come together and hold in the center. Similarly, what made 2 different individuals draw close to each other in love was also inexplicable. For a nuclear physicist working at the nuclear plant in Henderson County, it was a wonder to Dawn Nash. She truly marveled at all the things science had yet to explain. Now, as she saw the mild, powdery snow fall to the earth, she stared in wonder if anyone could explain love to her. Her first love had also melted away as the years passed. With every new baptism of snow, that former love had lost its hold on her. She didn't ache anymore over its loss. Her heart had grown cold toward that former flame. Dawn turned away from the window and sat down at the desk inside her office. Light streamed through the windows, warming up the place. The wood-paneled wall and dark brown interiors were designed for a male occupant. Female physicists were a rare species, but Dawn didn't mind. Her only personal touch, a framed quote of Marie Curie. It read, "Life is not easy for any of us, but what of that?" Against a backdrop of a lone bird over a snowy winter land. A light knock on the door of her office startled her. "Come in," she said. She smiled at the woman entering the room. Kara Reynolds, née Wallace, came in with the homemade apple pie. Kara had become synonymous with apples ever since she married Nathan Reynolds. Always a sucker for happy endings, Dawn loved how their story had unfolded. Secretly a romantic, Dawn wished something similar for herself. Alas, time seemed to be slipping away as the years passed, and love was nowhere on the horizon. She went around the desk to embrace Kara. "I brought you flowers," she said, holding up a big bouquet. The blooms were large and vibrant, a pop of color against the backdrop of winter. "How's the baby?" she asked Kara, while sinking back down to her desk. "Crazy hours. Brooke's been so helpful, but Nathan is nervous about everything. He panics at the sound of a sneeze or a night cry." The Reynolds had adopted a beautiful baby boy when it was abandoned at the convent of the Sisters of Carmel. Dawn folded her hands, happy to hear more details about the baby, the excitement clear in her voice. "Don't you think it's miraculous how this baby was just gifted to you?" Kara touched her wedding ring unconsciously. "Yes, it's as if, after years of heartaches, the blessings are raining down." Dawn sighed. She was happy for Kara, but inwardly she wondered, when would it be her turn? "So what about this zoning plan?" Kara asked her, shuffling her satchel and her papers. Despite her change in circumstances, Kara still wore her bohemian chic dress that reached all the way down to her ankles. The black and autumn leaves floral pattern dated the dress. Its 2-stage flounce at the bottom even more so. Kara had always worn clothes like this, and it was good to see that marrying Nathan Reynolds hadn't changed her. They had talked briefly on the phone about the zoning issue. Dawn extracted a folder from her organized drawer and slid it across. "Bauer Incorporated wants to purchase more land at the south of the property closer to the mountains for nuclear testing. It will be a new site for the plant extension. It must be investigated before we buy. The trouble is, we need someone who understands the environment in the area. Management is keen on preventing any environmental damage. We don't want to cause any harm to the fauna and flora." Kara seemed to mull it over. "So, you want me to study the local flora?" Dawn nodded. Not just the flora, but also ensure there are no exotic plants, insects, pollinators that would be affected. The last thing we want is some environmental group staging protests at our door. And what if there are exotic species? Kara gave her the side eye. Dawn remained cool. Then you'll have to identify them in the report. Bauer will either transplant all of them to another area or look for another alternative. Kara studied the dossier in her hand. It would be awfully expensive to transplant, she said after flipping through the pages. Money is not a constraint, time is. Once we have the approval, we'll greenlight the extension, and one part of the plant will shut down to build the new one. They expect it to come online in 6 months. That's the current time frame. Kara suddenly looked up. Wait, so if you have the approval and the plant shuts down, what happens to Bauer employees? Dawn smiled. Kara, always worried about everyone else. Don't worry, they're not laying off anyone. Most of the workers will be working offline, but some in the labs will be sent to Germany to train for the new plant. The main reactors will keep going with their usual staff. Dawn paused. Truth be told, Kara, I'm hoping to train and stay on in Germany. Oh, Kara's hand flew to her mouth. Why? Your dad is here, and what about the house? Dawn stopped to pull off the lint from her 100% cashmere sweater. My dad's planning on going sailing around the world. He wants to continue traveling the globe. A couple of his widowed guy friends are joining him. The house, she looked up with glassy eyes. It's not really been our home since Mom died. Maybe you'll meet someone in Germany, Kara said with a warm smile. Yeah, maybe, she repeated absent-mindedly. Have you even heard from Logan? Dawn wistfully stared at a spot on her desk. Once, there stood a picture of all of them at her 16th birthday. Kara and a bunch of girls and guys stood on opposite ends of the picture. Logan in the middle. Back then, they were such a tight-knit group without the cares and worries of life. She'd chucked that photograph years ago. Now that spot was empty. She kept no photos of anyone anymore. They seemed like a bad omen. Everyone she loved left her anyway. Logan's been gone 12 years. Not once has he ever gotten in touch. He's moved on, and I have too. You don't have to leave the country then, surely, Kara insisted, leaning forward into the desk. Kara wouldn't understand, and Dawn didn't have the energy to explain. She pressed the bridge of her nose and closed her eyes. When she opened them, she breathed out. You're right. I don't want to. I love Henderson County. I grew up here. I thought one day I'd have my own children here. I promised myself I'd wait here until I was 30, and then if nothing happened, I'd leave. Her response must have shocked Kara, who sank back and crossed her hands. What if I sabotage the report and say you cannot buy the extra land? Too many endangered species and all that. Dawn shrugged. Bauer may consider shutting down the plant then. We need to rebuild, Kara. The tech is old and the system needs a reboot. As fiercely loyal as you are to me, I know you're more loyal to Henderson County. So the fate of 400 employees is in your hands. Kara rolled her eyes. What about that guy you were dating? The Yeti? No, I couldn't, said Dawn as she waved her hands. Kara laughed, but Dawn could tell the news of her departure had upset the new mother. Kara's eyes weren't smiling anymore. She sighed repeatedly and tried to offer her other options to stay. Listen, everyone's moving on, and why shouldn't I? I'm happy with how it's all come together, and you should be too. So just be happy for me. Kara came around and put her arms around Dawn's neck, smelling of baby powder and soap. It was so unexpected. And it was moments of friendship like this that Dawn appreciated she'd been blessed with a true friend. They lived on opposite sides of the county, and they rarely met after the wedding. Yet they remained close. Do you remember how we became friends? Dawn thought back and smiled, while Kara went to the window. You were our ace, while I was the worst student of our class, failing nearly every subject thanks to the constant chaos at home, with a sailor father and a working mom. Kara folded her hands and leaned against the table. I helped you during remedial classes at school. She had volunteered to come around and tutor Dawn. They'd become friends and stayed so throughout. It took me forever to catch up. Thanks to you, though, I made it through college. Kara gave up medicine, and Dawn went on to become a nuclear physicist. Their paths in life had been so different. It had been brutal and hard work at university. Raleigh had not been far, but Kara was an aunt when Dawn returned. Do you ever regret what you did, Kara? Never. I did what had to be done. Dawn wasn't what you'd call intelligent. She worked hard, repeated, studied, memorized, and got her grades through persistence. I guess the only advice I can give you, Kara said as she walked around the desk, picked up her bag, and headed toward the door, is that in the end, do what's best for you, Dawn. When Kara left, Dawn leaned back in her chair. What was best for her? Leaving? Staying? Finding someone? All of it was up in the air. Her chances here were slim. She had nothing stellar about her that would make anyone look twice at her. She was someone who quickly faded into the background with her mousy hair and spectacles. Allow yourself to be discovered, her mother Mallory used to say. At 5'6", she was of average height and often wore her pantsuits for business. She liked to be power-dressed. She laughed at it all as she smoothed some of her boring brown hair back into its bun. She pursed her lips and felt she still had a good amount of gloss on those slim kissers. Not that she'd done any kissing for a while. Now all she had to do was meet with the boss and tell him about Kara's deadlines, and she could head home. After they had a word, she drove past the high-security gates. Winter wonderland had enveloped Henderson County. The chill outside condensed on the car with the toasty warmth inside. The dark green pines lay shaded under the heavy white snowflakes, and she powered on her lights, making a slow journey back into the mainland. Bower lay on the outskirts of town and was a good 40 minutes from home. Yet the drive gave her the time to think about her decisions, providing insight into the day and sometimes even time to plan dinner. Her father often went ice fishing and skiing. He was into adventure sports. And since her mother had died, the fear of losing his life had disappeared. He lived on the edge. It was almost as if he couldn't wait to join his sweetheart. Her parents had been married 36 years, a lifetime. She wished she'd have that someday. The suburban homes had all gradually started adding elements of Christmas to their yards with the close of Thanksgiving. Since Advent began, the decorations had intensified. Every door now featured a Christmas holly and a wreath with red ribbons, silver bells, and golden balls, cherries and candy canes. Some had snowmen, a few outrageous ones, cute angels, and already a few reindeers were out. And the lights. Oh my. She had to give credit where it was due. No one did tacky lights in Henderson County. White, soft, blinking blue, and all other kinds of lights lined the yards and homes. Only one word could describe the decorations of the homes in the area. Tasteful. She'd decorated her own door with a white wreath that she'd made of white twigs, cones, nuts, natural pods, cinnamon sticks, snowflakes, and flowers, which she spray-painted white and hung. Dawn had planned a white theme this year for Christmas, and maybe some of it was an effort to whitewash her life here before she started again in Germany. Once inside the warm house, she switched on the lights and watched the yard come to life with the soft LEDs. Quickly, she stripped off her coat, lest she develop an onion sweat in her toasty home. Her father had already lit a fire, and the sky still held light. It was too early for the fire, but she didn't complain. One thing she'd learned after her mother's demise was to stop arguing over petty things. She chucked her keys into a tray on the side table in the passage. Dawn stopped to listen if her father was upstairs. Probably not. There was noise outside in the backyard. She padded softly to the kitchen and stared out of the window. The house across looked busy, with people streaming in and out. There seemed to be a bustle of activity over the last 2 months. Repairs to the roof, new shingles, the picket fence redone, the home painted, a two-tone combination of green and white. Very festive. Could it be that Logan Greystone was coming home? Nah, the Greystones did this sort of thing every 5 years. They'd been neighbors since the Greystones moved in when she was 8, and they refurbished every 4 years or so. She put on her coffee and settled down to make dinner. At periodic intervals, she noticed a truck come in and haul a Christmas tree, and then more men parked toward the side gate. Maybe they were having a Christmas party, she reasoned. Woohoo! It had been a while since anything interesting happened in the neighborhood. How she would love to jive at a party or go to a Christmas dance. Henderson County stopped being such a hip place. Of course, Nathan Reynolds did rent out the Parkmore estate for occasions, but those were few and far between in the winter. It was going to be a long winter, from early November to late April. 30 minutes later, with a braised beef stew on the stove and rice in the rice cooker, she cleaned down the kitchen platform. Cookbooks lay scattered, and she put fresh water into a vase with blue carnations, amaryllis, and lily of the Incas, all courtesy of Kara. She smiled as she sang to herself. Dawn heard the heavy tread of her father through the door. "Hey, love. Smells good in here." She was a good cook. Now armed with her mother's recipe book, she could even call herself an expert. "I made braised beef stew and rice. Do you want a salad?" He stared at her a while before answering. "Sure, why not? I'll help." Dawn tensed. When her father decided to help or go out of his way to do something, it was usually prior to an epic announcement. Not epic to him, but to her. He'd always done it, even as a child. "I'm sorry, Dawn. I can't be at your communion this year. I've got a gig around Cape Horn. Dawn, I'm not going to be at your 16th because I'm sailing around Sydney. Chance to make history." And he did. He'd circumvented the harbor and back in record time, which put him as part of the team for the record books. "Dawn, I've got news for you. Your mother's got cancer. Dawn, you might as well say your last goodbye. Dawn, I've decided to go sailing after the funeral." She steeled herself and set out the plates for dinner at their pine table. "Why don't you spit it out, Dad?" she said, trying to sound as nonchalant as possible. He took out the homemade dressing and shook the bottle vigorously. Then he made an elaborate show of dressing the pre-cut vegetables, lettuce, corn, and carrots, after tossing it all in a blue melamine bowl. "I'm leaving for a tour in a week. Thinking of spending Christmas at sea." Dawn's hand tightened on the forks she took out. She processed what he said. No point fighting it out, she reminded herself. The bottom line is everyone should be happy in each moment they lived. Yes, life is short. If it makes you happy, Dad, then go ahead. Staying here, you'll only miss Mom more, and I know that's kind of hard on you. He set the bowl aside. "It's hard on you, too," he said, his mouth pressed in a grim line. Dawn looked him in the eye, even though it hurt. She was going to be all alone at Christmas. "I'm different, remember? Stronger. Listen, I didn't tell you this earlier. Bauer is offering me a transfer to Germany. By the end of December or early January, I'm going to move." A silence hung between them. It was the fragmentation of their family, the final rip in the seam that was once Mallory. Some people just hold families together, and in their case, it was her mother. Now more than ever, she missed her mother. She'd know exactly what to say and smoothen things over between father and daughter. "I want you to go and be happy," she said to Samuel, as if she were his parent. Tears laced his eyes. The doorbell rang, and she held up her hand. "Let me get that." The sun was just setting across the sky, golden skies against the blue and the panorama of snow. She opened the door and saw the neighbors, Abe and Cynthia Greystone. Dawn was a bit stunned to see them both here together. Since her mother died, the families drifted apart. That was over 5 years ago. Another relationship held together by her mother, now gone. Come on in. Cynthia didn't quite look her in the eye. She watched the woman smooth her silvery white curls against her coat. Looks like they weren't going to stay long, since Abe Greystone kept his coat on as well. Her father joined them. "Would you like to join us for dinner?" he asked the couple. "Dawn's made beef stew and rice." Abe smiled at Dawn. "One of Mallory's recipes," he said, and Dawn grinned too. People always remembered Mallory's cooking. She prepared chops for the church fete, cooked for potlucks, prayer meetings, PTAs, and every occasion in between. Mallory did it for as long as her health had permitted her to do it. "Yes, and I must say it turned out as good as hers," her father said. Abe's eyebrows crinkled, and the crow's feet around them drew his beautiful honey eyes that reminded her so much of Logan. In fact, seeing him here, she could imagine what Logan would look like in 30 years. A good-looking man who aged well and still had his hair. "Someday you'll make a man a very happy husband," Abe said, and Dawn watched Cynthia shift in her seat. Not Logan, she was reminded. She wasn't good enough for their son. "So, what brings you here?" Samuel asked them, taking a seat by the fire. Dawn's shoulders sagged in relief. It gave her time to breathe and collect herself. She was grateful for her father cutting in. "Would you like to drink something? A scotch, Abe? Something for you as well, Cynthia. Brandy, perhaps? Dawn, bring out the glasses." Dawn felt sorry for her father as he tried his best to engage them while they appeared to be keeping some distance. Cynthia fidgeted with her wristwatch. "I'm sorry, we can't stay long. We've got several visits to make, Samuel. As much as I'd like to, we're in a rush." A tense few moments of pause followed, and Dawn felt her stomach churn, as if she hadn't had enough bad news for one day. Cynthia started. "I'm here to invite you to Logan's wedding." Dawn froze, her eyes unblinking while watching Cynthia reach into her tote and extract a beautiful card of royal blue and gold. "He's getting married on the 28th of December after Christmas. I'd like for you and Samuel to be there." Dawn's heart suddenly ached. Logan was getting married to someone else. She could hear her heart shatter, and she put on a brave face. "Of course. I'm not sure about Dad since he's leaving for a trip, but I'll be there. Would you like any help?" Cynthia smiled awkwardly. "That's really nice of you, Dawn. We would appreciate it if you could house some of our guests during that weekend. I'll pay you, of course." "Rubbish," she said, waving her hand. "We'll be glad to help. Right, Dad?" she said with a cheery smile. Her father said nothing as he looked at the couple. "You haven't attended the Sunday Mass at 10, then? The final banns were read last week." Dawn attended the evening Mass every week, preferring to sleep in instead on Sunday morning. Not that she would have raised an objection. It was bound to hurt anyway. Better here at home than in public. She bit her lip as her fingers curled in her dress, realizing that 3 pairs of eyes rested on her. Her hand unclenched and flew to her neck. Abe gave her a sympathetic smile, and she felt the need to make a point. "So, that's what all these preparations have been for the last 6 months." Cynthia's guilty glance toward the card she'd placed on her table was confirmation enough. "Yes, so much had to be done, and there was so little time. I'd like to introduce you to some of Logan's cousins, too. Who knows? You might meet someone you like." It incensed Dawn that she was considered a burden to be foisted off on someone else. She didn't need pity, least of all the Greystones. "Don't worry yourself, Mrs. Greystone," she said, avoiding the use of her first name, pasting a false smile on. "I'm not going to be here long. I'm moving to Germany at the end of the month, and Dad and I might even consider putting the house on the market for sale." Abe's eyes shot up, as did Samuel's. That last bit just seemed the most natural thing to say, and Dawn wasn't alarmed by how it all fell out of her mouth so easily. Anger thrummed in her veins, and right now she hated the thought of simply being in this town. "That would be really sad," Logan and Penny planned to move back to Henderson County. He's taken up the job of managing the public waterworks system here. That's great news. You must be delighted, she said in a happy tone that didn't fool her father. Dawn wanted to storm away, her heart racing, but she stayed rooted to the spot. Samuel stared at her hard. So did Abe. Samuel added, "Well, it was bound to happen, Cynthia. Without Mallory, there's no reason for us to stay here. In fact, I might even consider buying a home in Germany to be closer to Dawn." Cynthia's voice faltered. "That's unfortunate. I was hoping to introduce her to one of my nephews. He's such a sweet boy, and I was so sure they'd get along." "Thank you, Cynthia," her father said in a gruff voice. "But it's a moot point now." Abe stood up slowly. "We should get going. We've got a number of cards to deliver." Cynthia stood, slightly wobbly on her legs, and Dawn remained seated. She heard her father escort them out, make some comments about the snow before saying goodnight, and close the door softly behind them. She reached for the card and pulled it out of its pretty blue envelope, a little ribbon of gold at the top, and embossed gold script, written in a loopy style. A verse from the Song of Solomon was embossed at the very top. "I have found the one I love." It tore through her, and she saw their names, Logan and Penny. It shouldn't have. She'd let go of him long ago. Yet the day's events had inflicted new pain. Old wounds reopened. In her mind, she started comparing the differences between herself, the old flame, and the new love of his life. Penny had both parents, and her address was in Connecticut. She sounded rich and affluent. Penny Calthorpe, posh, upper class. He'd done well for himself. She heard her father shuffle beside her. He wasn't one to do gestures or touches of personal affection, and right now, she longed to be hugged. "I'm not okay," she said, as a lone tear made its way down her cheek. "But I wasn't lying when I said you should consider selling. After this, I don't think I'll ever want to come back to Henderson County ever again." "I thought you were over him," he said. "I am," she said and paused. "I just don't know what I'm feeling right now." She held the card in a tremulous hand and went up to her room. Everything sat pristinely in its place. She padded about and sat on the queen-sized bed. Dawn felt like the burgundy walls were closing in on her. For a long time, she stared at the pictures on the side table. Her mother, her graduation, and her many birthdays. She couldn't really see them, her eyes brimming with tears. She closed them and let the tears drop. She went to her window for air. White silk curtains fluttered ever so slightly, and she stared in the distance at the pond. A large body of water that skirted and married the two homes, Logan's and hers. And now they'd be divorced forever. The water glinted. Weathered, raised flower beds and large rocks that bordered it had been freshly painted. The snow had melted along its rim, and a few snow buntings had flown to sip from the puddles. She shouldn't have been surprised. The Greystones had obviously been getting ready for a while. Movement caught her eye. A man walked forward, and she knew at once who he was. She took a step back, and as if he knew she was there, he turned and looked up. Snug jeans, a shirt under his dark navy sweater, and nice dress shoes on. He'd obviously traded up in clothes, too. Gone was the rough-and-tumble sweatshirt guy. The sinking light caught the brown hue of his hair. Depending on the time of day, it could vary between chocolate-brown waves to reddish-blonde streaks. Logan Greystone looked every bit as good as he always did. Maybe better. Dawn stared, unmoving from the spot, lest he knew she was there. Maybe he did. Then he looked away and smiled, the way he once did for her. This time, a woman with honey-blonde hair skipped to him. She was as tall as him, and they made a fine pair. She kissed his cheek, and he wrapped an arm about her waist. Dawn sank to the floor and held the card to her chest, finding it difficult to breathe. She remembered the time he'd returned home for the first time for college break. She'd missed him so much. Dawn had been angry with her father, half drunk and shooting darts so hard that folks had moved away from her.
"You must be pretty upset to be hitting all of them bullseyes."
"Logan!" she said and leaped on him. He rocked himself back on his feet and awkwardly set her down. He was a good head taller, and they'd been pals and neighbors for most of their lives, always orbiting each other. That year, with her 18th birthday, she was hurting so much when her father said he was leaving for a sail closer to Antarctica. He plucked the darts from her hand and dragged her out. "No, I want to get drunk," she argued. "You already are," he said with a laugh and hauled her to his truck. He drove in silence while she huffed. He stopped at the edge of their properties, where a treehouse had been built by his dad. His father had been a successful carpenter with a business that sent out custom furniture to much of the country. He had made this for the kids when their business had hit their first 6-figure sale. "You've had one too many tonight, so spill," he said after they climbed into the treehouse, pinning her against the wooden panel. When she looked away, he raised her chin with one hand and watched the tears spill down. He hugged her to his chest, and she held him tight. "My dad's leaving again. I thought he'd stay for my 18th birthday." Her words came out smothered. He rubbed her back, and she inhaled his woodsy scent. He'd obviously spent some time in the woodworking shop. She burrowed even deeper into his chest. "Dawn, he probably needs to get out of Henderson County. He's with you most of the time. Besides, you got me this year." She grunted. He laughed. "You want me to leave? Hey, I just got here." "I'm sorry," she said. "You deserve a better welcome." She stood and looked into his eyes. Then she slowly raised herself on her tiptoes and kissed him on the lips. He froze. "Am I not doing it right?" His hands tightened on her waist. "What are you doing, Dawn?" "Stop treating me as if I'm your sister. You're 20. I'm going to turn 18. You can kiss me." His eyes darkened. "You're drunk." "Not that drunk." "This would change everything between us. We've been friends for a long time." He touched her lips with his thumbs. "Is it because I'm not as good as the girls in your college sorority?" "No, that's not it. You're so young. We only have this winter. Then I go back to college, graduate, and search for a job. It's a long time." "You're talking as if it's going to be difficult." He shrugged. "It's not going to be fancy." "I don't want fancy. I want you." He laughed. "You're just saying that. Once you see the world, you'll change your mind." "I don't want to see the world. My dad has done it enough times. I've seen the pictures. I love Henderson County. I'll raise my kids right here." "Is that so?" he said, flicking her nose. "Now shut up and kiss me." "You're really bossy," he said, and she cut him off as she stood up and kissed his open mouth. She knew she was making a hash of it until he cupped her head and pulled her flesh against him. He schooled her in the ways of a kiss and angled her to deepen it. It was the best first kiss she could ever have imagined. Then, just when she thought he'd intensify it, he pulled away, and she could feel his breath on her nose. She opened her eyes, and he thumbed her cheek. "You're first?" he asked. She nodded, her brain too fogged up for words. "It got me half drunk myself," he said. "Come on, we better get out of here." And just like that, they became a couple. From friends to something more. Their parents were quite happy with the development, and Dawn forgot all about the disappointment of her dad. Not really, but Logan more than made up for it.